Tampanidhi Akvato namase Samannalapati Shaning Sadatu Chama Bhuttvadina Ganesakaru Karnaya Kopina Kanthasitau Krishna Kirtana Ganana Kanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau
Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Adunulambito Bujo Kanaka Bhatatu Sankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunabhataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudai Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhayo Charano Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Shri Gaudiya Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Srila Jiva Goswami Ki Jai, Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Anantakota Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you for attending another presentation on Srila Jiva Goswami's Sri Krishna Sandarbha. We continue today with a review of a reading from the Fourfold Army of the Parivas Sutra. And we're continuing in the second division. The first division dealt with supportive statements or statements from the Srimad Bhagavatam that directly supported the Parivas Sutra, Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam. And now Jiva Goswami is proceeding to show that the major dialogues in Srimad Bhagavatam also highlight the significance of the Parivas Sutra, in that we can see in the major dialogues that the major subject of the texts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Leela narratives presented therein, and the various dialogues, and the questions and answers are all supportive of and giving or giving direct reference to Krishna as that topmost manifestation of divinity. So, Krishna is the subject of the Bhagavat's major dialogues. Anuchetas 44 through 73, quite an extensive section of the Krishna Sandarbha, dealing with the subject. And then we continue on later in the last two divisions of his fourfold army with hermeneutics, or actually the linguistic presentation or scriptural interpretation of the various verses and how those also are supportive, as the divisions of an army are supportive of the king, the Paribas Sutra. We continue with the 53rd Anucheta. Parikshit's intelligence firmly established in the stories of Krishna. Srila Jiva Goswami writes in this 53rd Anucheta, this very same thing, Parikshit's mental fixity on Krishna, is understood from the words spoken by Sri Sukha after hearing King Parikshit's request in the 13 verses beginning with 10:1:1, or at the very beginning of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Jiva quotes a verse from the 15th verse, from the beginning of the 10th canto. O best of saintly kings, your intelligence is properly situated because irrevocable love for the stories of Vasudeva has been awoken in you. Jiva paraphrases as follows: although previously you had experienced tremendous delight by my recounting the exploits of various avatars, irrevocable, i.e. permanently established, love has now been awoken in you for the stories of the son of Sri Vasudeva alone. In other words, your intelligence is properly situated, meaning that it is supremely expert in the aesthetic relish of rasa, or bhakti rasa. Some commentary in regards to the Sanucheta. Earlier, Sri Sukha had narrated the stories of many avatars, such as Varaha, Nrsimha, and Vamana. Now, however, when Parikshit questioned him specifically about the Leelas of Krishna, Sukha declared that the king's intelligence was properly situated, samyag vyavasita. This implies that Sukha considered Krishna as superior to all the other avatars, and that his mind was fully established in him. As a result, he was able to detect a similar state of consciousness in Parikshit. So we can see some continuity of purpose, both in the hearing of Maharaj Parikshit and the narration, the chanting of Srila Sukadeva Goswami, both being most enlightened of all the dialogue, what's really nourishing them and allowing them to nourish each other's spiritual taste. Bhava is narrations directly related to the Leelas of Krishna. Jiva Goswami continues. Sukadeva's samadhi induced by remembrance of Krishna. We refer here once again to the statement of Sri Suta Goswami, cited previously in Anucheta 50. O Dvijas, having thus heard the extraordinary deeds of his protector, Sri Krishna, King Parikshit, who was entrusted to his grandfather by the Lord of the Adamas, requested Sukadeva to relate more of the same sacred pastimes that have captivated his mind. The Anucheta continues. Thereafter, Sri Suta said, illustrating Sri Sukha's condition on hearing Parikshit's request for Krishna Katha. O foremost of superlative devotees, Sonika. On being thus questioned by the king, Sri Suka, the son of Badarayana, was thereby reminded of the unlimited Lord Sri Krishna and the total quantum of his sense functionality was arrested by him. With great difficulty, he gradually regained external consciousness and replied to him as follows.
Allí fue arrestado por él. Con gran dificultad, él gradualmente ganó nuevamente una conciencia externa.
Jiva continues, "Oh, unlimited Lord, Ananta."
Oh, Señor
Here refers to Sri Krishna, whose complete majesty was fully manifest. Although Sri Suka was established in constant remembrance of him, it is said that he was reminded of him by Parikshit's inquiry simply because Sri Krishna is ever fresh at every moment. So Jiva is just accentuating the absorption of the speaker, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, as it has been highlighted in the words of Sutta Goswami responding. So Sutta Goswami here is relating to his audience, his observation, because he was present during this great event of Srila Sukadeva Goswami his enlightenment of Parikshit Maharaj. He was personally present, and now he's narrating that. So he's filling in he's setting the scene for his audience. This is what it was like there. And he's telling Sunaka, who's asking on behalf of all the other sages of Namasharanya, and he's saying, he's just relating that this was quite an event, and the emotional buildup between both Srila Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, especially when they enter into the narrations and the pastimes of the 10th canto, was quite extraordinary for him to observe, and he's trying to relay that to his audience at Namasharanya. So we can see that with great difficulty, he gradually regained external consciousness and replied to him as follows. So this comes up in a few different contexts, but it's mentioned that Parikshit's son was there also. And anytime Srila Sukadeva Goswami becomes so involved in his own Leela narrative that he was drawn himself into a state of internal samadhi in relishing the pastimes that he was sharing with Maharaj Parikshit. He would lose external consciousness, and the king's son would engage in a very profound kirtan at that time to bring him back to external consciousness so he could continue with the Leela narrative. Basically in deference to the time constraints that Maharaj Parikshit was under because of the curse. In 7 days you're going to die. So Maharaj Parikshit was on the clock. And he wanted to absorb as much as he could from the Rishi, from Sukadeva Goswami, before his time was up. And therefore,
Antes de esto, pues se le
sometimes
acaba el
when a
tiempo.
speaker would fall into samadhi,
Y claro, el hablante
the
está
audience
hablando en
may,
samadhi.
out of deference to the
La
speaker,
audiencia estaba teniendo pues una gran
just
diferencia del
allow him
hablante. Pero le estaban
to continue
permitiendo
on and maybe even
continuar, incluso tal vez
depart themselves and just let him remain in his
partir
state
de
of
allí
ecstatic trance.
y
But
permanecer
in
en
this
este
particular
trance
instance, the
extático.
deference was more
Entonces,
to
allí
the
la
necessity of
diferencia
Maharaj
es
Parikshit.
más
And
la
therefore,
necesidad de Maharaj Parikshit. Por lo tanto,
Sukadev was
Sukadev
always
estaba
pulled back to
siempre
the task at hand, his
atento de alguna mano
revealing to Maharaj Parikshit the
ante
Leela
las
narrative
las
of the
revelaciones
Bhagavat
que
Purana.
traían los pasatiempos del Bhagavad Purana.
Little from the commentary
Un
here.
poco del comentario aquí.
The questions raised by Parikshit
La
after he heard about the
las
killing of
preguntas
Aghasura
hechas por Parikshit después de haber sido
led Sukha to relate the wonderful
escuchadas
pastimes of
sobre
Brahma's
el
delusion
asesinato
by
de Aghasura,
Krishna's
la
display of
llevaron a
supreme
Sukha a
majesty.
relacionarse con un
At the
pasatiempo
mere mention
maravilloso
of this
de la
Leela,
devoción
Sukha was
de Brahma
thrown
por
into the
Krishna
state of samadhi,
y toda la
in which all
ejecución
external
de la
awareness was
Señor Suprema.
arrested.
En la
All of his
primera
senses
mención
were
de
then
esta
drawn
Leela
inward,
Sukha
becoming absorbed
fue
in Krishna, exactly as
fue
if
inducido
he
a un
were
estado de
personally
samadhi, en el
present
cual
there. His
toda
internal senses
conciencia
being thus
externa fue
awoken,
disminuida.
he could
Todos
smell
sus
Krishna's
sentidos
bodily
estaban
fragrance,
completamente
hear his sweet words, and so on. According to
inhibidos.
Sri Sanatan Goswami,
Todos
he was brought to
volviéndose y
external awareness
absorbiéndolo
again
en
by the
Krishna, así
performance of
como
loud kirtan
si él
accompanied by
estuviera
musical
personalmente
instruments.
presente allí.
The word puna
Sentidos
again
internos
indicates that such a
siendo
state was aroused in Sukha
despertados.
time and
Él pudo
again.
incluso
Whenever this occurred, Parikshit would
oler,
momentarily
sentir el aroma
experience
de la
feelings of
fragancia del
anxiety
cuerpo de él.
because his time
Pudo
was limited and there was so
escuchar
much more to
sus
hear. In
palabras
such
y de
moments,
esa manera. Acorde con Sri
Janamejaya,
Sanatan
the son of
Goswami,
Parikshit, would lead a kirtan to gently break
fue
Sukha's
traído
samadhi
pues,
so that he could continue.
la conciencia externa y nuevamente ejecutó el kirtan acompañado
Srila Jiva
por
Goswami
instrumentos
continues.
musicales. Jiva Goswami
Sunaka
Sunaka
recognizes Sukadev as a great
reconoce a
devotee of
Sukadeva
Krishna.
como un gran devoto de Krishna.
Again, Krishna Stu
Nuevamente,
Bhagavan
Krishna
Swayam. As we
Bhagavan
go
Swayam.
through these
Y
various
ya
verses that Srila
vamos
Jiva
a través de
Goswami is highlighting,
que Jiva Goswami está
we are
resaltando.
continually
Podemos
brought to the
continuamente
point
traer
of
el
the
punto
major
en que
Leela narratives, the major speakers, those that are
hablantes
sitting
mayores de
at
la
their feet
narrativa
and
de
hearing.
este lila que están escuchando y
They are all primarily throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam
están yendo a través
fixated
de
on
Srimad Bhagavatam fijos en
Krishna.
Krishna.
So these are all
Entonces, todas estas
statements
son
in support of
afirmaciones
Krishna Stu Bhagavan
en
Swayam. This is
soporte
the
de Krishna
topmost
Stu Bhagavan Swayam.
manifestation
Esta es la
of the
manifestación
Supreme
más
Lord.
elevada del Señor Supremo.
Therefore, after
Por lo
proclaiming King
tanto,
Parikshit as
después
a
de
great devotee of
proclamar
Bhagavan
al Rey
in
Parikshit
Srimad
como un gran
Bhagavatam
devoto de Bhagavan en Srimad
2.3.15,
Bhagavatam 2.3.15,
Sri Sunaka
Sri Sunaka
describes
describe a
Sukadev
Sukadeva
as
como
having
teniendo el
the
mismo
exact same devotional temperament
acto, el
as the king
temperamento
in the very next
como el
verse.
rey en este verso siguiente.
The venerable son of Vyas, Sri Sukha,
Venerable hijo de
was
Vyasa,
also
Sri
fully
Shuka,
devoted
también
to Sri
era
Vasudeva.
completamente devoto a Sri
Indeed,
Vasudeva.
in the
De hecho, en la
assembly of
asamblea
holy
de todos los
sages,
sabios
there are
santos,
naturally discussions
hay
of the gracious
discusiones
qualities of the
naturales de
Lord,
las
whose
cualidades
praises are
graciales del
sung
Señor,
by exalted
las cuales
devotees.
adoran y son cantadas
But
por
of
todos los
course, in the
devotos
verse here,
exaltados.
we see the significance
Claro,
of
en este verso vemos la importancia de
the pointing to
señalar
Sri Vasudeva.
lo que
The
señala
word
Sri
cha also informs
La
us
palabra
that
cha también
Sri
informa,
Sukha
nos
had the
informa que
same
Sri Shuka
temperament
tenía el mismo
as King
temperamento que
Parikshit,
el rey
who was
Parikshit,
described in the
que fue
preceding
descrito
verse.
en el verso anterior.
Consequently, here
De
also
forma
the word
consecuente, aquí también la
Vasudev
palabra
must be
Vasudev
explained as
debe ser
referring
explicada
exclusively to Sri Krishna,
refiriéndose
the son of Vasudev.
exclusivamente a Sri Krishna como el hijo
Even
de
in the
Vasudeva.
assembly of other holy
Incluso
sages,
toda la
Satam
asamblea de los
Samagame, there
sabios,
are discussions of
Satam
the gracious
Samagame,
qualities of
hay grandes
Bhagavan, whose
discusiones
praises are
sobre todas
sung
las
by
cualidades
exalted
graciales de
devotees.
Bhagavan,
So the
que
conversations
adoran y son
between these
cantadas
two
por
great
los devotos
devotees
exaltados. Por lo
certainly
tanto,
must have been
conversiones entre
predominated
estos
by
dos
the
grandes
pastimes
devotos
of Sri Krishna.
ciertamente deben haber
This
sido
is the intended
predominantes por los
sense.
pasatiempos de Sri Krishna.
So again,
Este es
Jiva
el
Goswami
sentido que se debe entender.
in his
Entonces,
Anuchetas
nuevamente, Jiva Goswami en sus
is pointing
anuchedas
out
está
what
señalando
is the intended
cuál
sense
es el
of these
sentido
other
real
verses in the
de
Bhagavatam.
estos versos
That
en el Bhagavatam.
we as students of the
Nosotros
Bhagavatam,
como estudiantes del
coming in
Bhagavatam,
the
viniendo
Gaudiya
de
Sampradaya,
la Gaudiya Sampradaya,
can see these narratives and
podemos ver
can
estas narrativas
read these verses only
y ver estos versos solamente
and come away from that reading
y salir de esta
and
lectura,
hearing
escucharla
only with this sense
solo con estas
of
afirmaciones.
purpose, that the intent of the speaker, the intent of
Que
the
eso era lo
hearer,
que
the
buscaba
intent
el
of
hablante.
Srila Vyasadeva himself
Intento de Srila Vyasadeva en sí
in representing the Bhagavat Purana
está
was
presentando el
all
Bhagavad
centered
Purana,
on Bhagavan
así
Sri
como
Krishna.
Bhagavan Sri Krishna.
Jiva continues.
Jiva continúa.
What more need be said
Lo
about the
que
fact that Sri
es más
Sukadev's
necesario
ultimate
decir
aim was
respecto
none other than Sri
al
Krishna? The 10th and
tema
11th
de Sri Vyasadeva
cantos,
Goswami
which
no
make
era
up
otro que
nearly
Sri
half
Krishna,
the book,
el
are
canto
concerned
décimo
almost
y
exclusively with Krishna,
once
are themselves proof
que
of
nos
this.
llevan un
After
paso más
concluding
cerca
in brief the
al libro
narrations
en
of
el
the
que se
other
trata
avatars in the
exclusivamente
earlier
temas
cantos,
respecto a Krishna.
Sukha greatly expanded
Estos
on
mismos
Krishna's
son prueba
glories
de esto.
in these two
Después de
cantos.
haber concluido en
Therefore, in
brevedad
the
las
very
narraciones de los
beginning
otros
of his
avataras,
discourse,
en
he
los
prayed for
previos cantos,
Krishna's
Shuka de
mercy.
forma muy grande
This from
expandió
the second
las glorias de
canto, the
Krishna en
beginning,
los dos cantos. Por
near
lo
the
tanto, en el
beginning of Srila
comienzo
Sukadeva
de
Goswami's
la oración de
narration to Maharaj
Krishna
Parikshit.
a Krishna por su
This
misericordia.
prayer is there. May Bhagavan, who
Que
is the
Bhagavan,
husband
quien
of
es
Shri, the goddess of
esposo
beauty, the
de
master of sacrifice,
Shri,
the
la
Lord of all created beings,
diosa
the
de la
ruler of all
belleza,
intellects,
el
the overseer
maestro del
of the
sacrificio, el
universes,
señor de
the
todos los
sustainer
seres
of the
creados,
earth, the protector and refuge
gobernador de
of the
todos los
Andakas,
intelectos y el que ve
Vrishnis,
por
and
encima de todos los
Sattvatas,
universos,
and
el
the support of
sostenedor
the
de la tierra, el
devotees.
protector
Please
y
be
refugio de
gracious
todos
to
los
me.
anakas,
The
vrishnis y
meaning is
sattvatas,
self-evident.
y soporte de todos los devotos, por favor, sé gracial conmigo.
Some commentary in
El
regards to
significado
this
es
Anucheta.
mismo evidente.
The
Vamos a
Andakas,
continuar con el
Vrishnis,
comentario
and
de
Sattvatas are
Anuchera.
different
Los
clans of
Andakas,
the
Vrishnis y
Yadus,
Sattvatas son
in whose
diferentes clanes de
dynasty
los
Krishna
Yados. Y
has
hay
made his
aquellas
appearance.
dinastías de estos
Srimad Bhagavat has
en las que Krishna hizo su
335
aparición. Según
chapters
Bhagavatam
divided
tiene
into 12
335
cantos.
capítulos divididos
Out of
en
these, the 10th and
cantos,
11th
12
cantos
cantos.
contain
Fuera de
121
esto, el
chapters
canto
and are
10 y
directly
11
concerned with
contienen
Krishna's
121
Leela
capítulos que están
and
directamente
teachings.
relacionados con el
Apart
tema
from
del
these
Krishna
two
Lila y todas sus
cantos,
enseñanzas.
there are
Aparte de
segments of
estos
Krishna's
dos
life
cantos, hay
that are
segmentos
recounted here
sobre
and
la
there
vida de
throughout the
Krishna que
first and third
son
cantos.
nuevamente
Thus,
contados
almost
aquí
half of the
y
book is
a
directly
través de esto el
focused on
primer y el
Krishna.
tercer canto.
The remainder of the
Por tanto,
Bhagavat may be said
casi
to
la mitad
present only a
del libro
backdrop for
está
that
directamente
component which
enfocado en
stands out
Krishna.
to form its main
Esto
body.
es un
The
recordatorio
narratives
de
related
que el
to cosmic
Bhagavatam
evolution and the divine
presenta
appearances of
solamente
yore
una
serve only
gota
to
del
allow
componente en
Krishna's
el que
delightful human-like pastimes to be
toma
seen in the
forma el
proper
cuerpo. Las
perspective.
narrativas relacionadas con
This
la
central
evolución cósmica
focus
y
of the
las
Bhagavat
apariciones
on Sri
divinas
Krishna thus
sirven solo
indicates
para
that he
permitirle a
alone
Krishna
is the
disfrutar
ultimate
los
aim
pasatiempos
of both its
humanos
original speaker
para
and here
ser
Sri
visto desde la
Sukadev
perspectiva
and
apropiada.
Parikshit
Este
Maharaj.
foco central está en el Bhagavad y Sri Krishna indica aquí que él en sí mismo es el
Going on to the
el tema
57th
último
Anucheta.
que expresa Parikshit Maharaj.
Krishna is the sole aim
Anucheta
of
número
Vyas.
57. Krishna
Next, it is
es
shown that Sri
único
Krishna is the
objeto de
sole
Vyasa.
aim of Sri
Siguiente,
Vyasadeva. Srila
después
Vyasadeva also
mostrado
saw
que
that the
Krishna
yoga
es
of
el
unalloyed
objeto de
devotion to
Vyasadeva.
Bhagavan,
Vyasadeva
who
también
is
vio
beyond
que
sense
el yoga
perception, adoksaja,
permitía
is the direct means to
devoción a
extinguish
Bhagavan,
this misery.
quien está más
Knowing
allá de
all
cualquier
this, the
percepción
wise
perceptiva,
Vasudeva
adokshaya.
composed this
Y esto significa
Sattvata
directamente
Samhita,
que para
Srimad Bhagavatam,
para
for the people in general who are
la-
unaware of this fact.
haciendo esto,
Indeed, in
el
the
sabio
very
Vyasa
act of
compuso
receptively
el
and
Sattva
attentively hearing
Samhita,
this
Srimad
Srimad
Bhagavatam,
Bhagavat,
para las personas
Bhakti to
en
Sri
general
Krishna,
que
the
no
Supreme Person,
estuvieran conscientes de
self-manifests in a
incluso
person's
en
heart,
el primer
dispelling
primero
lamentation,
acto receptivo y
illusion, and
atento,
fear.
escuchar el Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhakti hacia Krishna,
Self-manifests
la
in a
suprema
person's
personalidad,
heart.
el ser se manifiesta
So
en el corazón de
the,
una persona,
the power, the sangha
evitando cualquier
that's
lamentación,
contained
ilusión y
in the
miedo. Entonces aquí esto contiene
Bhagavatam itself,
el Bhagavatam en sí
being
mismo,
being
siendo
itself a literary incarnation
una encarnación
of the
literaria
Supreme
del
Lord.
Señor Supremo.
And within that
Y dentro de esta
manifestation of the Lord,
manifestación
the
del
Bhagavat
Señor, el
Purana,
Bhagavad Purana,
all of his other
todos sus demás
Shaktis and energies
Shaktis y
also come
energías
into
también
play.
están
And all
en
of his
juego aquí.
great devotees are, he
Todos sus
doesn't come
grandes devotos
alone.
están aquí, él no viene
Whenever
solo.
Krishna manifests,
Cuando Krishna se
he's
manifiesta,
with his eternal
está con sus
associates. So
asociados
whether he
eternos.
manifests
Entonces,
in
si él se
Vraj,
manifiesta en Braj,
whether he manifests in
si
Navadvip,
se manifiesta
or
en
whether he
Navadvip,
manifests
o
in the
así se
pages of the
manifieste en las
Bhagavat
páginas del Bhagavad
Purana,
Purana,
he does not come
él
alone.
no viene solo.
So through the
Entonces, a través
association
de la
of his eternal
asociación,
associates,
sus
as they make
asociados
themselves
eternos, así
available
como
to us,
le permiten
as the
estar,
narrators
le
and
permiten estar disponible para
hearers
nosotros,
of the
todos
various
los que están escuchando el Bhagavad,
leelas
escuchándolo
and
respecto a sus lilas,
significant spiritual instruction that's included and provided for us in the Srimad Bhagavatam, from that tremendous association, that hearing, receptive hearing, Tadvadi Pranipatena Pariprashnena Sevaya, we ourselves,
nosotros mismos,
bhakti comes into our heart, as mentioned here in this verse. Bhakti to Sri Krishna, the Supreme Person, self-manifests in a person's heart, dispelling lamentation, illusion, and fear.
Pero en el corazón de la persona, evitando la lamentación, ilusión y miedo.
We could, of course, go off into discussion of inherency, but I think the words of the verse are self-evident in this regard.
Verso nos lo muestran.
Jiva Goswami continues. And he says, the word adoksaja, the Lord who is beyond sense perception, refers to Sri Krishna, since his name is a popular epithet for Krishna, as in the following verses from the Vasudeva Mahatmya of the Harivamsa Purana. Now, Jiva Goswami ventures outside the Bhagavat Purana for some shastric praman or evidence for the points that he is making for our spiritual benefit. The fierce demoness named Putna, who had assumed the form of a flying witch, was killed by baby Krishna while he slept in a cradle under the axle of a cart.
Asesinada por Krishna siendo bebé.
The demoness, who was gigantic, powerful, and terrible to behold, had offered her poisoned breast to baby Janardhan, but was killed by him instead. When the residents of Vraj saw the dead witch lying there, they declared, "This boy has been born again and should
pero
therefore be
fue
called a doksaja.
en
He
esto
who
fue
has been
listado
awarded
por
new
eso.
life
Cuando los
from under
residentes de
the
Eurasia
axle
vieron
of a cart.
la muerte de esta
Harivamsa
bruja
Purana.
yaciendo allí, ellos declararon, este niño ha sido
Jiva
nacido
continues
para
and says
y
in
debe
his
ser llamado
Anucheta,
adoption.
such being the case,
Siendo el caso,
Vyas
Vyasa
uses
usa
the
la
word
palabra
Krishna
Krishna
directly in the second
directamente
of the
en
two
el
Bhagavat verses quoted above.
segundo verso del
The author of
del
Sri
Bhagavatam.
Bhagavan
Arriba.
Nama Tamudi
El autor de Sri Bhagavatam
also says,
dice,
in its primary
en su sentido
sense,
primario,
Ruti Vritti,
Shruti
the word Krishna
palabra
signifies the
Krishna
supreme Brahman,
significa el supremo Brahman,
who has a blackish
tiene una
complexion like the
complexión
tamal tree
casi
and who
como
suckles the breast of the
el
soda.
árbol tamal.
This is so because of the predominance of such usage and because such is the meaning that immediately springs to mind as soon as
Esto
one
es también
hears
porque
the
la
name Krishna
predominancia
being
del
uttered.
y por lo
In the
cual
Sama
el
Upanishad,
significado es
also,
inmediatamente
Krishna is
relacionado
directly
con
referred to
mente.
as the son of
Ya
Devaki.
tan pronto es oído
The
el nombre de
sage
Krishna,
Agniras had imparted
en el
this
Sama
metaphysical
Upanishad
teaching
también
unto Krishna,
Krishna
the
es
son of Devaki.
directamente referido así como el hijo de Devaki.
Here in the
Así
second
Krishna,
Bhagavat verse
hijo de
quoted
Devaki.
above, the book's
Aquí en el
fruition is
segundo
said to
verso del
be
Bhagavata,
exclusively in Sri Krishna, and by his attainment
objeto
alone,
del libro
the
es
Bhagavat's
que
utter completion
exclusivamente
is
Krishna.
accomplished.
Y por esta obtención, el Bhagavata tiene una
Some
conclusión
commentary in regards
completa.
to this Anucheta is given.
Entonces,
Vyas is the author of Srimad
Vyasa
Bhagavat.
es el autor de Srimad Bhagavatam.
Before writing this book, he
De
sat absorbed in devotional
escribir este
samadhi
libro,
and was
él se
granted
sentó en la
a direct
aflicción
vision of the
devocional
Supreme
en
Person,
samadhi
Sri
y
Krishna,
eh,
along with
le
his
dio una visión
energies.
directa de la
Therefore,
suprema personalidad
sometimes the
de
Srimad
Krishna
Bhagavatam is
a lo
referred to
largo
as
de todas sus
a
energías,
samadhi
pero
bhashya,
así en la
or a book
base
that
de
came out of
la
the samadhi
experiencia
of
y se
Srila
compuso el
Vyasadeva.
libro.
The commentary
Los versos
continues. On the basis of this
el
immediate
comentario
experience,
continúa.
Vyas composed the book. The
Los dos
two
versos
verses
citados
cited here are part of the
son parte de
description
la
of his
descripción de la
experience and are vital to
experiencia y son
Jiva
vitales para
Goswami's
la
understanding
comprensión de
of
Jiva Goswami
Vyas' intent
respecto al
in
intento
writing
de
the Bhagavat.
Vyasa el
Sri
escribir el
Jiva
Bhagavad.
identifies a
Jiva
doksaja as
identifica a
Sri Krishna
Dakshaya
and provides two
como Sri
reasons for
Krishna
this
y nos da
conclusion.
dos razones
First of all,
para esta
Vyas
conclusión.
himself
Primero que
uses the
todo,
word Krishna
Vyasa
in
en
the
sí
very
mismo utiliza la
next
palabra
verse.
Krishna en el
Secondly,
verso.
according to the
Segundo,
description found in
acorde a la
Harivamsa
descripción
Purana, a
encontrada en
doksaja
Harivamsa
is a
Purana,
name of
Dakshaya es el
Krishna,
nombre
derived from the fact
derivado
that he
del hecho
obtained
de
a
que él
new life
obtuvo
while
una
lying
nueva
under
vida
a
mientras
cart by
estaba desciendo en el
escaping
carro,
Putana's
escapando de
poison.
Putana,
So we
del
can see
veneno de Putana.
the interesting
Podemos
way
ver
that
aquí esta forma tan interesante en la que
we're schooled in
estamos
the
siendo
logical
educados respecto a
presentation
la presentación
utilized by
lógica
Sri Jiva
utilizada por
Goswami and
Jiva
how
Goswami.
through that logical
Cómo a través de esta
presentation, he
presentación
brings
lógica
out the fact that
trae el
the
hecho de
terminology
la
used by Srila
terminología usada por
Vyasadeva
Srila
and the
Vyasadeva
nomenclature
y la
that of
nomenclatura
identifying a
que identifica
doksaja
a
as the
Dakshaya
supreme personality
como la suprema
uh,
personalidad
can only be referring to
puede ser únicamente
Sri
referida
Krishna,
a Sri
Bhagavan
Krishna,
Sri Krishna,
Bhagavan Sri Krishna.
thus supporting the Parivas Sutra.
Está soportando el Parivashutra.
Others may be able
Otros
to
pueden estar en capacidad de
or provide a different
dar
explanation,
una
but I
explicación
can support
diferente,
my
pero
understanding
es mi
based
comprensión
upon this verse
basada
from
en
the
estos
Harivamsa
versos del
Purana,
Harivamsa Purana,
wherein
donde se
the
explica que
definition of
la
a
definición
doksaja
de Dakshaya
specifically refers to
realmente
the pastimes of baby Krishna
los
in
pasatiempos
relationship
de
with
Krishna como
Putana.
bebé en relación con
Putana and her trying to
Putana
poison
y
him. to death. And he actually was unaffected, or he came back to life as a different way of looking at it, and where the word adoxija would be most applicable. These are all very much pulling us into the various Leela narratives of Krishna. And we're going to be quite pleasantly rewarded by Jiva Goswami as he takes us step by step by the hand. He's taken us up to the point of the Parivas Sutra and looking at all the other avataric descents of divinity as put forth in the beginning of the Bhagavat Purana. And now coming to the key for the Gaudiya understanding, the Parivas Sutra, and gradually schooling us thoroughly in how that Parivas Sutra runs through, is the main support provided through the whole narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And fixing our mind on Krishna as he is doing now, step by step, as we come out of the Parivas Sutra, then he's going to introduce more intimately to Krishna as Krishna reveals himself through the Srimad Bhagavatam. He's going to introduce us to his associates. He's going to introduce us to his places of pastime and introduce us to the narration, also that we come away from this Krishna Sandarbha, which is the real focus of Jiva's Sambandha Gyan. The others, the Tattva Sandarbha, the Bhagavat Sandarbha, the Paramatma Sandarbha, were all laying the groundwork for upon which we could fully apprehend the significance of the original Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And now Jiva is busy firmly establishing Krishna as he's presented in the Bhagavatam, and he's completing the task of the first 4 volumes of his Sandarbhas, which are centered on Sambandha Gyan. If we can see how all the threads of these various tattvas are woven together, and that all the Lord and all of his various energies, how they manifest themselves, then we can, with that firm grounding and that firm ground upon which we can stand in place, then he can take us into, now you can enter, let me take you into the world of bhakti. And in his next Sandarbha, he will introduce us to bhakti and firmly establish us in the Abhideya that allows us to ourselves become fully qualified for the ultimate attainment. And then he also gives us that in his Priti Sandarbha, Prem Bhakti. how is that
¿Cómo es esto?
manifest
No.
in the life of a sadhika?
¿Cómo es que esto se
So,
manifiesta en la vida en sadhaka?
There's a lot going
Hay
on
demasiado ocurriendo aquí.
in Srila Jiva Goswami's Satsandarbhas. And we're truly blessed to be able to study them and through that, the tutoring of Jiva Goswami, be able to extract the essence, which is what the word Sandarbha itself means, from the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Del Srimad Bhagavatam.
We'll continue on to the
Vamos a
58th
continuar con el
Anucheda.
58.
It may be seems some redundancy here by Jiva, but he is just pounding the post. We can look at this Parivas Sutra from every different angle, from all the different viewpoints of all the individual devotees in the Bhagavat Purana. And we, as Gaudiyas, can easily see this entire Srimad Bhagavatam is taking us to Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And so Krishna is the sole aim of Narada. Next, it is shown that Sri Krishna is the sole aim of Sri Narada, who informed Sri Vyasadeva. My dear Vyas, in that place I listened each day to the enchanting stories of Krishna, mercifully sung by those sages. With each moment that I heard these narrations, with faith, love was awoken in me for Bhagavan, whose glory is most endearing. The two verses spoken by King Parikshit, beginning with 10.7.1, cited in Anucheda 51, are also relevant in establishing that the word Krishna here refers to the son of Sri Yasoda by the principle of Shruti Samanya, which holds that a word or statement is understood from its general meaning. That meaning which automatically springs to mind on first hearing the word. So, again, Jiva's saying, we can use any verse, and we can look at things in so many ways. And in this instance here, we can see we're talking about Krishna, the son of Yasoda. And we can see that by using the simplest of presentations, Shruti Samanya. What first springs to mind when you hear the word Krishna? And for Gaudiyas, the first thing that springs to mind is or the son of Nanda, or the lover of Radha, or the friend of Subal. Narada repeats the word Krishna throughout the Bhagavad. In the statements of Narada in the Bhagavad, repetition of the word Krishna is also seen in verses such as the following. O Brahmana, Vyasadeva, in due course of time, the appointed moment of death appeared like a flash of lightning to me, whose mind was thus fixed on Krishna, who was devoid of attachment and whose heart was free from all taint. Elsewhere, also, Narada makes explicit contextual reference to Krishna. Indeed, you, Pandavas, are exceedingly fortunate in this world, of human beings, because the sages who purify the entire world visit your home, where the Supreme Brahman himself, Sri Krishna, resides, disguised in human form. This very Brahman, who is the embodiment of the experience of the unadulterated bliss of liberation, sought after by highly evolved beings, is verily your beloved friend, cousin, intrinsic self, worshipable deity, obedient follower, and preceptor. May he, the master of the Sattvatas, whose essential form has not been directly described in truth, even by the likes of Shiva and Brahma, not even through the analytical power of their intellects, and who is worshipped by us through silence, devotion, and sense control, be gracious upon us. Then he goes to a quote from the commentary in this regard by Sridhar Swami. Swami also comments in this regard. Sri Narada spoke these 3 verses to King Yudhisthira while lamenting, alas, how great is the fortune of Prahlad, by whom the Lord was seen. We, on the other hand, have not been so fortunate. This will come to a very interesting conclusion, this Anucheta, which continues as follows. He writes the phrase, Manushya Lingam Gudam, disguised in human form, indicates that his bodily composition includes all the characteristics, linga, such as hand and feet, that are particular to human beings, as seen in the world. This is the form rupa being specified, by which is meant his Sri Vigraha, or divine spiritual body. This form has not been described in truth, vastupaya, meaning that because his form is itself the Supreme Brahman, it is impossible to determine what exactly this abiding substance, vastu, is. As is said in the Vishnu Sahasranama Stotra, his body is ineffable, anirdeshya va. Because these verses confer supreme joy, they are repeated again by Narada at the end of the 7th canto. There's some extensive commentary, and then we'll mention a couple points here. The commentary. Satyanarayan Das explains as follows. There are 6 criteria, sadlinga, by which an author's intention or the essential message of a book can be assessed. One of them is known as abhashya, the repetition of the principal subject throughout the text. In this Anucheta, Sri Jiva Goswami demonstrates that Narada repeatedly refers to only to the name of Krishna in his instructions to Vyas and King Yudhisthira. The first verse quoted here was spoken by Sri Narada while recounting the story of his past life to Vyas. The other 3 verses were addressed to King Yudhisthira after Narada had concluded the story of Prahlad, in which he underlined the extraordinary fortune bestowed on Prahlad by Bhagavan Nrsimha. On hearing this account, King Yudhisthira, out of humility, began to feel as though he were less fortunate than Prahlad. Sensing this, Narada proclaimed in the 3 specific verses the altogether unparalleled blessings conferred upon Yudhisthira and his brothers.
haciendo paralelos, como
Prahlad
una
was indeed
bendición
greatly
conferida a
fortunate
Yudhishthira
because
y
Bhagavan
Brahmana.
Nrsimha blessed him
Prahlad
with his
fue
own
de
direct
hecho
appearance.
un gran
Thus,
afortunado porque Bhagavan
this he did, however,
dijo
only on one
con
occasion,
su
whereas
aparición
Bhagavan Sri
directa.
Krishna, who is referred to as the
Esto lo
Supreme
hizo
Brahman himself,
como
used to
sea,
regularly come and live with
solo
the
en una
Pandava
ocasión
brothers
donde
in their
Bhagavan
own
Krishna
home for months at a
fue
time.
referido como el supremo
Moreover, he was
Brahman
their
en sí mismo,
intimate friend and
utilizado
also their cousin by
regularmente
relation.
eh,
Many illustrious
para
sages, whose
venir
audience
y
is
vivir en
extremely difficult to gain,
por los
used to flock to the
hermanos
capital
Pandavas
of the
y por
Pandavas
su
on the odd chance that
hogar
they might
por
get to
meses.
see Sri Krishna.
Además de eso,
Consequently, the
fue
fortune of
un
Yudhisthira
amigo
and
muy
his
íntimo
brothers
y también
far surpassed even that
primo en
of
relación.
Prahlad.
Muchos sabios ilustrados esa dificultad para entenderlo, y fue una capital de los Pándavas.
This brings out such a nice and sweet point that in narrating the Leela narrative of Prahlad to King Yudhisthira, Narada saw that he was feeling himself, as all devotees do, in their great humility, feeling himself less than Prahlad Maharaj. Not that he wanted to be more than Prahlad Maharaj in any material sense, but wow, Prahlad Maharaj got such blessings from Bhagavan Nrsimha, who saved him and who dispatched his demoniac father and who took him on his lap and embraced him, even to an extent that Lakshmi herself was set back by the affection that the Lord showed to Prahlad. So Narada sensed this in Yudhisthira Maharaj, that he was feeling somewhat despondent, that I've never experienced what Prahlad experienced in the way Prahlad experienced it. Maybe I'm not such a great devotee of Krishna. Maybe I'm deficient in so many ways. And sensing this, Narada immediately encourages Yudhisthira and reminds him of the significance of his and his brother's relationship with Krishna, and how Krishna even served as a menial servant at times and treated them as the closest of friends and spent months living with them as a brother would live with a brother. So much so that sages would go out of their way, who were not seen hardly at all, who never left their hermitages or came down from the Himalayas, would flock to the capital of the Pandavas just to catch a glimpse of Lord Krishna. And Yudhisthira and his brothers were seeing Krishna day in and day out for months at a time. We also notice this in Sukadev's narration to Parikshit Maharaj, in narrating the good fortune of certain devotees. He noticed in Parikshit some despondency and some where Maharaj Parikshit would feel himself inadequate, and then Sukadev would again have to encourage him. And we see in the narration those instances coming up repeatedly, so that the hearer the student
el
himself can
estudiante, aquel que
feel
escucha,
encouraged. And
puede
this
sentir animado.
is the great
Y esa es la gran
generosity
grandeza,
of
la
all the
generosidad de
gurus,
todos los gurús.
that they are
Ellos
always encouraging their
siempre
students.
están
The
animando
student
a
is
los
always feeling
estudiantes, y
himself
siempre el estudiante se está
insignificant and
sintiendo
in humility,
insignificante,
feeling himself
con una actitud de
inadequate in so
humildad,
many ways.
sintiéndose
But the gurus say,
inadecuado en tantas
no,
formas.
you are
Pero
also there. This is
no, tú
maybe for
también
the sadhaka, what's coming
bueno,
out is
pues,
this is your
de
prospect.
pronto
Someday
sadhaka,
this
este es su
will be
prospecto.
your page in
Y
the
un día
Bhagavatam will also be written.
tu
So
página en el Bhagavatam también va a ser
we've
escrita.
spoken for some time here,
Bueno, hemos
and
hablado
this
ya
seems a
por un
good
tiempo.
place to
Y bueno,
cut
parece un
things
buen
off for
lugar para
today.
cortar por
If
este día.
anybody has
Si
a
alguien tiene
question, we
alguna
can certainly
pregunta,
entertain that.
claro que la podemos responder.
And if there are no
Y
questions,
si no hay
I will
preguntas,
thank you so much for your kind association.
muchísimo por su amable asociación.
Vanchakapatubhyascha, Kripasindavevacha, Patitanam Pamanebhyo, Vaishnavidya Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Thank you so very much.